Hi, everyone. This is Katie Sweetman with Empowering Astrology, and this is your weekly look at the astrology of October 21st to October 27th, 2019. It's hard to believe that we're actually getting into the end of October. Time is flying per usual. Using this opportunity to, of course, get a chance to talk with you all, to share with you all, and to hear from you all what's going on in your lives and how you are living the astrology that we're going through. As we start this week, we're wrapping up Libra season. So Libra season began back, I believe it was the 21st of September. And it's a time when, the sun is going through the sign of Libra. So it means that we are kind of experiencing life through this metaphorical month that is devoted towards partnership and connection. So, of course, I know that, if you know your astrology is the sign of, or Libra is a sign of relationships, but of course, it's so much more. The sign ruled by Venus teaches us about connection. It teaches us to, let's say, set aside our needs, our wants, our desires, and to listen to what somebody else needs, whether it's an intimate partner or somebody that you know on a one-on-one basis. Because Libra is a sign that archetypically teaches us about socialization. So our experiences this month have been so much about connection and partnership and relationship. And I've heard a lot of stories. This is why I'm kind of recapping what we've been going through in October. I've heard about the end of relationships. I've heard about relationships coming back together, but needing to do the work. Because the astrology that we are experiencing this month, not just with the sun in Libra, but also, let's say, Venus in Scorpio, Mars in Libra, Mars on the lunar nodes, it's a time when we may feel challenged by a relationship or a need to deal with something that's, let's say, simmering underneath the surface for a while. So Mars, as a planet, it can be confrontational, and even in a sign like Libra, where it has to learn to negotiate other people's needs, it can be a little, let's say, hot-headed in relationships. So if you're watching live or if you're watching the replay, how has Libra season been for you? Have you seen anything going on in your relationships you've had to negotiate, or have you had any sort of, let's say, power struggles? That might also be a theme that's going on during the season. But one of the things that I said going into October in my monthly horoscopes, do make sure that even though it is getting towards the end of the month, like, go back and read your October horoscope, like what resonates, like what's really hitting for you, and maybe what what didn't. Hi, Debbie. So what's resonating for you in your October horoscope? Because what I was saying when we went into October was that this was going to likely be a very challenging month. There just was way too many indications that our buttons are getting pressed. Our buttons are emotional buttons, our buttons in relationships, and we were coming up on a time that was going to activate the eclipse energy of July, activate the eclipse energy also of January. So that tells me as an astrologer, which is why I communicate to you all, that we were going to see some situations, let's say perhaps, come in and out of our life quite quickly in October. And especially if you are a sign that has the eclipses in it, your Cancer, your Capricorns, a lot of Capricorn rising, Cancer rising clients of late. It's been like one after another. So, I know that those two signs have been getting it a lot. And of course, if you are a Libra or if you are an Aries, you may have been feeling this time very strongly. So, part of this, recapping this, is because Mars is finally getting past what's called a square to the lunar nodes today. So that pressure is going to hopefully start to lessen. But Mars is, it is still hitting eclipse degrees as it goes through Libra. Right now, I believe it's at 11 degrees of Libra. I need to put my clock up so I can see where it is. Yeah, it's at 11 degrees of Libra. So, as it gets to, let's say, 15 was the degree of the January 5th solar eclipse. It's going to get to 24. That was another eclipse degree. It's going to get to 20 degrees, which is another eclipse degree. So we might still be seeing these, kind of twists and turns as we go into November. Maybe unfortunately, maybe not unfortunately, because sometimes these things that kind of come in quickly are for the best. Mars is coming up against Saturn over the next week. So I think that this is really a time when we need to get our stuff together right now. Saturn's kind of going to start to check in on our progress. So we might be seeing relationships needing to recalibrate, reform, recommit, or even if it's not going to work out, come apart. So, this week we're wrapping up Libra season, as I was saying, and then we're going to go into Scorpio season on the 23rd of October. So happy almost birthday, Scorpios, including myself, although I'm towards the end of Scorpio. When we go from Libra to Scorpio, we've gone from this idea of connection and relationship, and then we're going into a sign, Scorpio, that's archetypically devoted towards psychological, kind of going inward and looking at your stuff. Each sign of the zodiac has something to teach. If Libra is teaching us about cooperation and negotiation, Scorpio is teaching us about having the courage, because it is a Mars-ruled sign, having the courage to face the things that we fear. There's this idea of psyche in Scorpio. There's this idea of needing to go to the depths of anything with Scorpio. And it's also a sign that teaches us that things don't last forever. There's a natural cycle and rhythm to the world. And here in the Northern Hemisphere, the leaves, they're starting to turn. We're in autumn, the nights are getting colder and the days are getting shorter. So here comes Scorpio season to remind us that it's time to, let's say, go into the proverbial underworld, go into that darkness and that shadow, which is a very necessary process in the life cycle. Kind of need to go through Scorpio in order to come out in Sagittarius season, which is a sign that after we've been, let's say, tested by Scorpio, we now look at, well, what do we believe in? How has that shaped how we see the world? Sagittarius, faith, philosophy, wisdom. So, this week we're coming to the end of Libra season. We're crossing into Scorpio season, but we're also we're in, let's say, coming to the end of the lunar month. So when we're in the end of the lunar month, and the lunar month did begin on September 28th, it's time to take stock. It's a time to reflect, to turn inward, and to, as I say, take consciousness. And what does it mean to take consciousness? It means to look back and almost see yourself from an outsider perspective and say, what did I learn? What am I doing on autopilot? And what am I kind of realizing that I need to stop doing on autopilot? Because, one of the good kind of point to make is that astrology just teaches us about time. It teaches us about the quality of time. It teaches us about metaphoric time. So there's always going to be this ebb and this flow between what's going on. We have days that might feel calm. We have days that might really challenge us. And so the goal with empowering astrology is for us to look at what subconsciously or unconsciously we're not realizing is kind of plugging into this energy. And the more that we do that, the more that we reveal, and the more that we transform, the more that we have a very different experience with what's going on in the sky. The point here, guys, is that I'm trying to make is that we need to kind of do our work so that we have more personal freedom. We're always going to be connected to the planets and the energies and the subconscious energies, but we can kind of catch ourselves before we start acting, reacting, then maybe things will be a little different in our lives, and maybe even a little different in this world. So, it is a time to, let's say, go back and reflect, journal, meditate, because when we go into the weekend, we're going to have a new moon in Scorpio on Sunday. So a new moon just simply means that we are kicking off a new lunar month, and one that's, let's say, seated with the energies of Scorpio. So it's a time when we're going to have to really work through that Scorpio archetype, just like we did when we had the Libra new moon at the end of September. So the Scorpio archetype, as I was saying earlier, it really wants to challenge us, to grow and transform. And something that I'm noticing with the astrology right now, especially my Cancers and my Capricorns, the way that we've been, let's say, operating, we can't keep operating that way. So if we've been keeping ourselves small, the astrology is really pushing us to shed that smaller container so that we can be bigger. And we have to take a look at the things and the experiences and, let's say, the people in our lives that are keeping us small, which leads me to the Scorpio new moon, because the Scorpio new moon is going to be a check-in with our Uranus Taurus story. So if this is the first time that you're hearing Uranus and Taurus, back in March, Uranus, like, it's, the analogy that I constantly use is that a planet is almost like a hand on a clock. And for the last 7 years, Uranus was in Aries. It was like a hand on the clock pointing towards Aries, saying that it was a time to really awaken and start, start these new beginnings. And people had very powerful transformations during that time. And starting in March, the hand changed. It started to point towards Taurus. And so that tells us that collectively, over the next 7 years, we have to transform, we have to reinvent, we have to break through, we have to awaken how we do Taurus. If you are a Taurus, this means you have to reinvent yourself. But for the rest of us, that energy is coming into a certain part of our life. For Scorpio, it's about relationships, for example. For Leo, it's about career. And so over the next 7 years, you are reinventing that part of your life, and the status quo or the story as it is now may be quite different than where it is 7 years from now. And I know it's hard to think about our lives and that, kind of these macro story arcs, but if you are, let's say, a Scorpio or a Taurus or an Aquarius or Leo, maybe your life has already started to majorly shift in a certain direction. So this isn't brand new information. So here comes the Scorpio new moon. It's making what's called an exact opposition to Uranus and Taurus. So this is a check-in, guys. How are we reinventing a certain part of our life? There's an article that I wrote on my website called Uranus and Taurus Sign by Sign. It's not in the show notes now, but I'll put it in later. You can always go to my website, empoweringastrology.com, and that will tell you what part of your life has been getting that Uranus energy. So there's a part of your life that you need to kind of, let's say, face your fears and get out of your status quo and leave your comfort zone. There's a lot of reasons why we might get really comfortable in a certain part of our life to a fault. But astrology, kind of this idea of this more evolutionary type of astrology, is that the planetary energies are just constantly interacting with us to help us to grow and evolve. So Uranus is a planet of awakening. So going into November, it might be a time when we have to really awaken to something. We might have to make a break from the past, make a break from the old, or something or someone might come into our life that represents this energy that, you know, might be completely different than, let's say, somebody we've met, or, you know, where we've been going so far. So I'm just going to check in with the comments. Christina is completely reinventing her career. Me too, because back in March, I quit my day job of 12 years to do this full time. So I know all about what it means to take a huge risk and to reinvent myself and to reinvent a certain part of my life. I'm not a Leo, which is where this energy is taking place, you know, career for Leo, but my what's called my chart ruler is in Leo, so definitely seeing that on my end. You know, this, like I said, can be relationships. For Aquarius, I've seen so many Aquariuses that have just made big moves. They've moved cross country. They've kind of done something radical with the home. So, you know, this is playing out for all of us in different ways, but that, let's say, that thematic thread might be there. Another thing about this new moon is Mars is making what's called a square to Saturn. So I think that whatever we're doing going into November, it's a bit of a weight to it. You know, Saturn really wants us to get serious, wants us to set healthy boundaries. It wants us to say no where we need to say no. It wants us to also build and plan and strategize for the future. So you might be feeling that kind of Saturn boundary as we go into November. I mean, I have Mars square Saturn natally, so it's an energy that I'm quite familiar with. And I think that if anything, it really pushes us to achieve more, to take on more, to grow more. It's, you know, sometimes it's like when you're at the gym and your muscles just won't move. I mean, that's kind of sometimes for Saturn, we really feel Saturn in the Saturn Mars. But I think that the energy is really pushing us uphill a little bit going into November. Just checking in on the comments. Maddie, you asked about not having a birth time, and that's actually a really good question. There are some workarounds, and Maddie, you're not the only person. There's many reasons why we wouldn't have our exact birth time. We might be born in a country where it's not legally recorded on the birth certificate. That's Canada, that's UK, that's Australia. Or it could be lost. There are some circumstances where it has been lost. If you know, Maddie, I don't know what country you're in. If you're in the US, depending on how old you are, it's the time has been legally recorded. You can go to the state vitals department online for the state that you were born in and order a copy of your birth certificate. You pay $50 max, and sometimes you have to request a long form birth certificate so you can get the actual time. Like, I ordered a copy of my birth certificate for just for, you know, stuff, passport stuff, and my time wasn't on it, but I've seen my birth certificate, my original one, and I know the time. You know, Maddie, if you are not in the US, sometimes the time is written down by a family member in a baby book. So if you can get it within a half an hour, that's much better than nothing. Sometimes I've heard of people calling the hospital of where they were born. This happened, I think, in the UK, maybe even in former Soviet Republic, and it was in the hospital records. So it's a bit of a, oh, you're in the UK, I see. So, you know, sometimes it's there. So Maddie, if you don't have it, if these kind of avenues are exhausted for you, and I'm sure somebody else who's watching this is in the same boat, you work with, well, one, you work with something called the solar chart. So that's a chart that's set for your sun sign. So if you're a Scorpio, for example, you would create a chart that has Scorpio rising, and then each sign, subsequent sign, becomes the second house, the third house. So it kind of calibrates this chart. There's another thing, it's not something I do, it's incredibly labor intensive. You can pay an astrologer to what's called Mattify your birth time. It's basically reverse engineering the birth time based on things that have happened in your life. It's not a slam dunk, because I do know somebody that had an they did get a rectified birth time, and then later was able to actually, this was the person that called the hospital in, I think it was Belarus, and was able to get the time, it was Bulgaria. And so it found out that the rectified time was actually not the correct time. So it's an option. I'm just putting it out there on the table so you know what you can do, Maddie. But I understand, sometimes when you've had things in your life and you're working with an astrologer, you can start to get a little bit of an idea of what maybe let's say within an hour or 2 hours of the correct birth time, based on major events like marriage or moves or, God forbid, deaths, and, things that really mark, the chart based on how it would be calibrated. So I see Leslie wasn't on the, just told over the phone. Oh, that's really interesting. It's a good point, Leslie, that you were able to actually get it time over the phone. Because like I said, when I ordered it from Michigan, I wasn't on my birth certificate. But you do get a lot of good information from what's called the solar chart, but the solar chart is showing your life from the perspective of the sun, the self, the ego. So it can sometimes feel a little small self. The rising time does give you that larger perspective. So yeah, good question, guys. And if you're watching the replay and you've managed to get a copy of your birth time in a way that I have not shared, please share for everybody else, because this is a question that I get very often, as an astrologer. So yeah, it's, when we have that exact time, it gives us this, it kind of creates your own personal timepiece for your life. When all these different hands are pointing at different places. So yeah, just to kind of recap for this week, if you're just joining me, it's astrology this week. We're winding down not only Libra season, we're stepping into Scorpio season, but we are getting ready for a new moon. So this, when we're kind of in that dark of the moon, it tends to be a time that's better suited for reflection, meditation, wrapping things up instead of starting things new. Oh, and I should mention that we're coming up on Mercury retrograde on October 31st. Not the end of the world, but in true Mercury retrograde fashion, we might be hearing from people from the past, something that we worked on before, now we got to come back to it, maybe that kind of classic shenanigans. I just say, don't, if you can afford to wait, because usually when you do make some major decisions during Mercury retrograde, you don't have all the information. And speaking of information, Mercury, so something previously buried, Scorpio, information, Mercury may come out. So really pay attention to what's coming up for you when Mercury stations retrograde. I'm just reading the comments. Oh, thank you. Yes, lovely testimonial from Leslie about working with me. Yes, please, I do one-on-one consultations. If you book with me, likely you probably are Cancer Capricorn or Cancer Capricorn rising, because those are the two signs that seem to be getting a lot coming up right now. But I love to teach people about their own chart, even when we don't have an exact birth time. But I think more importantly, and this is the work that I do, kind of go back to that earlier comment that I made, the more that you can see what your blind spots are, the more that you can see what might be influencing how you react to certain situations, the more that you can start to make different choices. So this is where I use the chart as this map of you, this map of your life, but what's the highest potential? And what's in the way of that potential? What are you working on? So this is why I always say that empowering astrology is astrology plus consciousness, because when we kind of see things and we shed light on things, things transform. They have to transform. We can't kind of keep going back to the way things were. So just a couple of reminders about this week. I am teaching, speaking of healing, I'm teaching a webinar on Chiron on Saturday, October 28th. And Chiron is a planet that is really close to my heart, in the sense that I think that it really helps us to understand that, like, distill the chart down into like that one thing. What is it that, if you can unlock that, it really opens the chart. And so this is an all levels webinar, meaning that if you know some astrology, great. If you don't, this is going to give you some foundation into understanding a newer addition to astrology. I'm also doing another webinar on October 28th, and this is to give you a sneak peek on November's astrology. So because we know that the Scorpio New Moon on the 27th of October is a bit unpredictable, it's got that opposition to Uranus, we know that November's astrology is going to be very Uranian in flavor. Let's say expect the unexpected in November, especially with Mercury retrograde until November 12th. So just checking in on the comments, as per usual, it's always a pleasure and an honor to be able to connect with you all, and thank you all for your comments. Thank you all for your future comments. And I do get comments, of course, with the replay. Getting a chance to be able to connect with you all and to explain more about how astrology is a part of your life and how you can learn to interact with it differently. So thank you all so much for joining me for another Facebook Live, or if you're watching on YouTube, you're watching the video, thank you again, and we will connect next week. So until then, bye.